Hey guys, how's it going? Finally back working on the square body today. The goal for today's video is to get this cab permanently attached to the new floor. So let's get to it. So you can see where we're at right now is the floor from the 2010 truck is cut a little bit bigger than it needs to be. So what I'm gonna do to get this thing straight is again, measure off of these back cab mounts, and I'm gonna measure them to the seat mounting bolt holes or the studs. We'll get them perfectly the same on each side. We'll measure from here to that seat bolt, same on the other side. We'll square it all up, and then we'll start doing some welding. Now for the back, what I ended up doing is cutting slots in each of them and then folding them up. So I'm gonna lift the cab now, fold these to the inside, then set the cab back down. And then these pieces here are gonna be on top of here. We're gonna lap it, trim it to the right length, and then weld all the way across. Got the engine crane set up here. Okay, I got all three pieces folded in here. You can see this is sitting back down flush on here. I just folded them over too much. One thing I did to make them fold easier is there's a couple of supports or raised bumps in the floor here. So I cut slots into them, and then that made that fold up nice. So those are ready now to basically just fold straight back against this lip. We'll just trim this up a little bit. It's gonna basically be straight up and down. We'll get them together, clean that all up, lay a few welds. Won't fully weld it until everything else is exactly where it needs to be in square. So the next thing we're gonna tackle is, you can see the bottom line there, the rocker panel is actually crooked with the original rocker on the newer floor. So we're gonna take the jack here. I'm just gonna lift it up like this. And you can see it kind of levels itself out. It kind of fell into place almost at the back there as it straightened out. I'll just measure here and measure here, make sure it's 100%. And then I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole where the front lower fender bolt goes through. I'm gonna drill that through, put a bunch of washers here, and bolt that and pinch that tight, and that's gonna keep the front of the cab straight. Because this on the original body is very close to where that front mount is, and that's very strong there. So if we bolt that tight, the front of this corner is gonna be perfect. We'll then measure that hole, replicate it on the other side, and the front of the cab is then gonna be very square and at the right height it needs to be. Then we can go ahead and start at the back and start welding towards the front, and it's not gonna move on us or do anything crazy like that. There's a gap in between here and the new body, or the new floor. So I'm measuring that distance on this side and on the other side, and it's coming out to 1 inch on this side and 2 inches on the other side. That means the body is a little bit too far that way. So I'm gonna make a spacer that's 1.5 inches wide. We'll put it in here, move this over, and then when we go back to the other side, we'll put that same 1.5 spacer in, and that'll have it centered on the front. I'll also take the time to measure the center of the hole from this front lip, which is 6.5 inches. And then also down to the bottom line here, which is 3 inches to about the bottom of the body there. 4 inches to the bottom of the rocker. So we'll drill that hole in the same spot on the other side. There you can see it installed. I'll go do the same thing on the other side. So I got that bolted in. So the front of the cab is exactly the same on both sides. Okay, so I got all the back things trimmed up here. I cut them down shorter so they just overlap a little bit right here. I gotta clean all the paint off, and then those are gonna be ready to just fold back and weld on. I've gone and measured the seats to make sure it's square again to the seat mounts to the back of the mount here. And the last thing I want to do is use a degree gauge to make sure the rocker panel here is the same as the floor here where it's flat. I've got that set, it's about -1 degree. So I compare that to right there. So I settle it out. I'll go double check the other side, but everything's been staying very square, so it should be the same. So if I do need to end up adjusting the angle at all a little bit, I still have the engine crane hooked up here at the back of the cab. I can just go up or down with it right now, no problem. All right, so I got most of that prepped over there. We're gonna do a double check here. -1, -1. Now we should see the other side about the same, but in the positive just because of the way the gauge will be sitting. It's about +1 there. And this is actually kind of bent up here. This rocker is damaged. So we'll try to stick to the outside edge here and see what happens. And it's kind of showing about 0, but also remember, this is damaged and is lifted up there a bit, which would tilt it towards the 0 just a little. We'll go along, we'll start tacking them, and we'll kind of pound them flat, and we'll work these bumps out of here. And we'll have to go down along the bottom. You can see here I notched these out on the bumps, so I'll have to weld those back in. So I'll get everything set up here and we'll start welding her. Okay, so before we get too far on welding everything together here, there's something pretty major we need to address, and that's the cab support at the back. Normally the cab support on these cabs is right across the back here, and you can see it's this big reinforced beam going across here, and that's where the cab mount's mounted to directly. Now since we're moving the cab mounts down here to the outside, we need to tie somewhere around here up into this beam going across the top here at the back. So what I'm going to use for that is some 3x2 rectangle tubing. Took some cardboard and I drew a little bit of a template here. And we're going to cut a piece of 2x3 rectangle tubing and we're going to put it in like this. So like that. We're going to weld it along the bottom. We're going to weld it along the top there. And we're going to weld it to that beam up there. We'll have to finish welding it when we do the cab corners later on. But for now, we'll get it welded in as much as we can, and that's going to get the strength back. So that'll take the load from this cross beam and it'll distribute it down to this outside cab mount from the newer floorboards. So I'm going to get to cutting, get a couple of those made, one for each side. They should be exactly the same. We'll get them slipped into place and get them welded in. All right, so I got the right side just about done. Not fully welded in, but welded in enough where I'll be able to transport the truck, so I got to move it. So I did a bead at the top here and a bead at the bottom. I ended up putting in a couple of flat 2-inch wide plate steel right at the bottom here to go from the support to the body. Give it that nice wide support brace to sit on. A little bit of welding in there to kind of get that tied in together. The other side I got sitting in place. We'll take a look at it and then I'll weld it in. So I got a couple tacks on this one as well to hold it here, up on top. This inside here is bent down a bit. So I'm going to put the jack underneath it like I did on the other side, lift it up to close that inside gap in, and then I'll weld all the way around the bottom. With everything welded in here, I'm going to then go ahead and cut 2 slots in right here. We're going to lift this up. I'll be able to weld in the top of the support to the factory cross member in the cab, and then we'll fold this down. It actually needs to be extended down a bit to come right up to the cab support here. And then these side ones here, we're going to kind of fold them over and hopefully everything will line up and close in. And this here will just weld that in as well. Okay, we got that opened up here. You can see we got a pretty big gap there going to that cross member, to our little cross member thing. But you got to remember that's about half of the width of the support brace that we made. So I'm going to cut a couple of flat pieces and box that in right at the top there. I'll just lay them down and then weld everything up solid. And once we tie everything into the sides and at the bottom and fully welded, that's gonna be nice and strong, and it's gonna support the back of our cab. All right, couple of squares cut there. I ended up cutting this out a little bit more so I can get into it better. Just gonna lay them on top like this to box it in and tie it again into that inner cross member. So one there and one right there. So you can see I got those welded in a little bit there now. Still need to do the finish welding all around it, and that'll probably happen when the cab is off the truck. On the outside here, you can see again, not fully welded, but mostly welded. Still got to tie everything in together and do all the finish welding. That side's the same way, but at least I was able to move the truck and not have to worry about these bending or cab collapsing at the back at all. So our next thing to do on the truck is to start tying the front together. I also have not welded any of the sides or anything yet, but before we get any of that done, we're going to need to get the engine up front here with the transmission and transfer case and make sure everything's going to clear the tunnel and the firewall. Once we got that all figured out, we'll probably end up unbolting the cab, flipping it up on its backside, and then fully welding everything and seam sealing and doing all that. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up for today's video. Next video, we will get the engine and transmission mocked up in here. Then we can finish the front firewall to the new floorboards, making sure that we do clear the transmission tunnel and the engine and the up pipes and the turbo and all that good stuff on the LB7 Duramax engine and the 4L80 transmission. So thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so I can catch you in the next one.